A way to spot a presentation that doesn't have a purpose is it doesn't have an end.
Hello, I'm Neil Perkin, the host of Think with Google Firestarters. And Firestarters is a series of insightful conversations with the interested and interesting of the advertising, marketing, innovation communities. And today on the podcast, we are looking into exceptional techniques for presenting ideas and speaking at events with the brilliant Marcus Brown. So Marcus has been a performance artist and conference speaker himself, but is now the CEO and founder of Speakery, which is a business that does more than just speaker training. On the site, they say the public speaking coaching that puts your audience at the heart of your performance, which is a good way of putting it, I think. And he's developed a whole series of tools, including the speaker presentation canvas, and also runs the annual Speakery Summit in Germany, where he lives. So Marcus, welcome to Firestarters. Delighted to have you on. So can I ask a bit more about why you started Speakery and also what your provocation is for the Firestarters audience?
Well, some would say that Speakery as a whole is one big provocation. But I've picked one thing out for you all. What I'd like you to imagine is that at the very beginning of my company, I was still advising companies on comms and creativity and stuff. And one of those customers said or asked me if I could teach them just 1%, a little bit of what I was doing on the stage myself. So these big complex performances that I had been known for up until that time. I said, yes, of course, that might be quite fun. And I expected it to be quite simple, that I would just show them how to stand correctly on stage, how to be a show person, how to have personality, how to stand. And that's also what they expected from me. They wanted me to tell them what to do with their hands, which is the most requested skill that I'm asked to help with. But what I was discovering when people were coming to me, and it still happens today, that these are symptoms. So the presentation problems that a lot of people are having are not the actual problems. So my provocation is that most pitches fail not because of inadequate presentation skills, but because the pitch or the presentation or the person giving it doesn't have a purpose.
So you're going to have to tell me more, because I think there's lots to explore there. So tell me about this idea of the pitch or the presentation having a purpose.
Well, I can tell you what it isn't. When a presentation doesn't have a purpose, it's something that just springs out to me and to most audiences as well. So a way to spot a presentation that doesn't have a purpose is it doesn't have an end. So you've probably been at a conference and watched somebody stand on stage. They have a super strong beginning because they've practiced that bit. But somewhere around the middle, it starts to wobble. And their eyes glance down at the clock, which is ticking down. And they start to rush and they start to waffle. And they start running over because they can't find an end, because it doesn't have an end. And the end is so super important for a presentation, because that's normally where you pack the juicy stuff, the point of the presentation, the purpose. So for a lot of people that come to me, they have been given the task of giving a presentation. Most of the times they don't want to do it, which is great. I love those. Or somebody with supreme confidence has been sent to me, and they can't quite put the finger on why their presentations or pitches or performances aren't quite working. And it's normally because they don't understand why they're giving the presentation in the first place, or the presentation doesn't know why it exists. So that's what I mean by the purpose, that the presentation either doesn't know why it exists, or the reasons for its existence aren't aligned with either the audience it's being given to, the company the person represents or the person themselves. And when those things are aligned, that's when you have a really, really good presentation. So it's my job basically not to tell people what to do with their hands, but to align all of these purposes. What's the plural for purpose? Purpose. I've just made up a word. Purpose. Hello, strategic planners. There's a word for you. Purpose. To align all of those things up so that everybody has a sense and an understanding of where this thing is supposed to be going and where it wants to take them.
Yeah, and I think unlike the canvas you described, it's like a North Star. What's the North Star of your presentation, as it were? But yeah. I'm going to pick out audience, if I may, just to ask you a bit more about that, because you have you've written before about 9 presentation principles, and principle number 1 is about the audience. So I'm interested to ask a bit more about, you talk about being audience obsessed, and so what does that mean in terms of the presentation and the, you know, how you're actually presenting it, and your preparation for it?
Well, first of all, the first principle of Speakery was ruthlessly stolen from Amazon. Their first leadership principle is customer obsession. And for me, a speaker is, well, the audience is the speaker's customer. And that's why it's so important to be obsessed about the people who are sitting in front of you. So a speaker or a presenter or a pitcher or a public speaker, however you want to describe them, needs to ask themselves a whole bunch of questions before they open up the laptop and fire up PowerPoint. Who is the audience? And then drill down into who is in the audience. So you start to get a much better idea of who's actually there. So for the strategic planner people who are now watching this, that this is something that, you know, should be quite familiar to you all, because that's your job, right? You start to think about, okay, well, who is the customer? Who is the segment? Who is the customer? What do they look like? What do they feel like? What are their motivations? And really building up an empathy for the people that you will be presenting to. Then you start to ask yourself the question, well, okay, well, why are they there? So there may be a difference between the conference audience and a pitch audience, for example, or a upselling an idea at a customer meeting audience. You may find people who don't want to be there. So they've been told by a boss, go and watch that presentation from Neil Perkin and come back and tell me what he said. So they might not want to be there. Then there are other people who are super interested in what you want to do. And then there are what I call the wobbly ones. The ones who are sitting on the fence, the ones who didn't necessarily know that you were on. They're a conference audience and they've just stayed sitting in stage 1 just to see what happens. Now, these are, for me, the super interesting parts of the audience are the wobbly ones, because these are the people that you can take on a journey, give them your North Star and find out if it's theirs. That's why it's super interesting and important to start asking yourselves questions about the audiences. And then, you know, the most important question or part of the audience obsession is, what do you want them to do? Which is something that a lot of presentations tend to forget, is that, you know, what's the point? What's in it for them? Because your audience is always sitting there thinking, okay, that's great, Neil, but what's in it for me? So the audience obsession part is incredibly important in terms of being effective with your presentation, giving the audience value, you know, not wasting their time. It's difficult being an audience these days. You sit in a conference and you're bored to death, and that's why a lot of people talk about conferences as ways of networking, and it's never about the keynotes. It's about the coffee breaks in between, which I think is just a dreadful waste of time. Get rid of the keynotes and just have coffee mornings. So when you do this work, when you start to see the audience, when you have real empathy for the people that you'll be standing in front of, you have this incredible power all of a sudden, because you're not thinking about yourself. And by focusing on the audience, not focusing about yourself, ditching your ego, giving yourself fully into the service of the audience, you start getting rid of nerves. Very nervous, timid people suddenly stand on my stage here in the studio full of confidence, because they're just completely focused on the people sitting in front of them. So that's why the first principle and the foundation of what I now call the Speakery method is ditching your ego and becoming audience obsessed.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably there's the sort of feeling almost sometimes when you stand up in front of an audience, whether it's a training or workshop or conference speech, whatever it is, to kind of feel like you need to show what you know, and that almost like leads to you're just speaking for too long, trying to cram in too many things and stuff and facts and whatever, and try to be too clever.
Yeah, showing off.
What you seem to be saying there is that if you are really thinking about from the audience back, you're really thinking about where do you want to take the audience from to, what's going to be most valuable for them. You're almost kind of really, instead of the emphasis being on you, like you said, ditch your ego, you're actually thinking about how can I help, and what can I do that will actually help these people to go on that journey, or to think about where the end point is for them. I mean, it's do you think that generally presentations try to cram in too much stuff, and just they go too fast, or there's too many kind of bits and pieces to it, too many kind of mismatched sort of bits of story or whatever? Is that generally a kind of common mistake that people make?
Yeah, very much so. It's dependent on age, experience, culture, gender to a certain degree. If you give, so I live in Germany. I am a German now, have been since before a certain referendum. So I'm very German. I've only ever worked in Germany, so I'm super German. If you give us as Germans a 30-minute slot for a presentation, we will go to the wire. Like, literally try to use the entire 30-minute slot, which is obviously it's a wasted opportunity, because I try to encourage people to see a presentation as the amuse-bouche for the most important part, which is the Q&A.
Right.
That's where real audience interaction starts to take place, and very few people actually plan for a Q&A. They dread it, because that's the bit they never prepare for, but it's the most important part. So if I go back and look at a list of asks that I get when people work with me for the first time, so number 1 is going to be hands, number 2 will be sort my nerves out, and number 3 is audience interaction. You can't have audience interaction when you go to the wire.
Yeah.
So that's the first problem. The thing that you talked about right at the beginning there, this idea of cramming so much in, showing off, is something that I see particularly with younger colleagues, with people, super smart people who may only have a couple of years of experience. And it's not because they're rubbish. It's because they're trying to prove that they're worthy of standing in front of you and to tell you stuff. Now, they can prove that by just getting to the point, which is principle number 5, is we just get to the point, cut to the chase, tell everybody why we're here, why it matters, what the problem is, what the solution is, and how we're going to fix all of this stuff. That's very difficult to embrace for somebody who's just starting out in their careers and has the opportunity for the first time or a couple of times to present their ideas. Then, of course, there's the male ego dude who gets to the stage and who loves the sound of his voice and just, focuses on what I call ego winning. So there's ego winning and useful winning. Ego winning is getting standing ovations and having articles written about your keynote and stuff like that. All the stuff that I used to love and ended up putting me in hospital. And then there's useful winning, which is answering all the questions, being relevant, helping the audience solve problems, helping the CMO hit his bonus. There's an idea. Let's figure out how to do that for the man or woman. Creating value, being as helpful as possibly can. And as soon as you do that, you realize that some of the other stuff happens as well. So it's this whole cramming idea it has a lot to do with ego, has a lot to do with insecurities, culture, and a general lack of understanding of how not only a story works, but how stories are shared, presented, and produced.
Yeah. I mean, I want to ask about stories actually, because I'm a big fan myself of using stories in workshops, in talks and whatever. And I also love it when I see people who do it in their talks. So it might be a story about themselves. It might be a story about something from history or a situation. I don't know, but it just seems to land the point really, really well. So what would be your advice about how people can just tell or use stories in either pitches or in speaking?
Well, you have to collate them, you have to curate them, you have to collect them, you have to go hunting for them, you have to put in the work, you have to know what to do with them.
Yeah.
In terms of the actual craft of doing it, you just need to grab a non-fictional book about something. So if you take a Robert Greene book about mastery, for example, which I recommend if you want to get good at anything, Robert Greene's Mastery is a fantastic book. Pretty much every chapter of those kinds of books starts with a story about something. But it's not just any old something. It's a story that gives your story or your facts and figures context. So storytelling is painting pictures, right? So we talk a lot about painting picture words, and a presentation is nothing more than a big colorful painting that you're painting for the audience so that they can step inside and have a look around and see themselves in it. That's why stories work so well in verbal communications, in presentations, in introducing yourself to somebody.
Yeah.
But you do have to do a little bit of work and try and figure out, okay, how does this then work? So you could tell a story about Mao Zedong killing all the birds that were eating all the crops, for example. No, killing all the cats. So, Mao Zedong killed cats, but the cats were killing the birds that were eating the crops. And because the cats were gone, the crops were being eaten by the birds, and then there was a massive famine. Great story, interesting, but what does that have to do with your pitch or your presentation? So you kind of need to work out, okay, well, how do these things fit together? You need to take your time and you need to build the story. You need to understand the mechanics of storytelling, and they're not that complicated. We all know about the hero's. We're all supposed to know about the hero's journey. We can understand that a story has an act 1, act 2, act 3. With a little bit of research, we can find out that act 1 is oftentimes, nearly always, status quo, once upon a time. And act 2 is most of the time always chaos, and then something happened. And then act 3 is the problem got sorted out, and they all lived happily ever after. In advertising, that would be the kids are playing on the lawn, status quo. the kids fall over into the mud, chaos, and then Persil comes along and the clothes are washed clean, resolution. So that's storytelling theory. But how do you build it into your presentation? How does it work in a way that the audience will understand your painting that you're painting for them? So yes, you can use those kinds of stories. You can use personal anecdotes, the classic TED construct. I was living a life of pure success, and then I've built it into the speakers, the speakery mindset thing that that I'm using at the moment, where I build up this big thing about the fact that I thought I was going to die, and I was rushed into hospital and thought I had a heart attack, and woke up the next morning in a chest pain clinic in Munich, and the doctor came in and said, "Great news, Mr. Brown, you didn't have a heart attack." And I'm disappointed because I could see because I'd worked out an entire LinkedIn campaign around I'm a heart attack survivor, and it turned out to be severe indigestion reflux stuff. And that's kind of like a riff on the classic TED model of coming back from a very, very dramatic situation. Can you do that in a pitch? Yes, you can, but it has to work, and the stories have to fit together perfectly. And to work all of that out, you have to put in the work. It's all about the work. It's not about your hands. It's about the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you think I want to ask about imposter syndrome, because it does get talked about a lot. I mean, I guess the two things here. So one, do you think it's real? And second thing is, if you are standing on a stage and let's say you're speaking at an event and it's one of your first kind of talks at a conference, let's say, and you start to feel like in the back of your mind, this little voice going, "Oh my God, you are speaking in front of 200 people, and who are you to stand up in front of this on the stage speaking to 200 people? You shouldn't be here. You don't deserve to be here." All that kind of thing is going on in the back of your head, and you start to get really nervous. What do you do about that?
Yes. You're not worthy. Well, I've got some good news and some bad news. So let's start with the bad news. The bad news is, if you're standing on the stage in front of 200 people and the voice in the back of your head is saying, "Oh, you're not worthy," it's too late. There's very little you can do to fix that on stage in front of 200 people. That happens for a number of reasons. The main reason it happens, and this is the one that a lot of people don't like to talk about, is because they haven't done the work, Neil. They haven't done the work. They haven't done the practice. They haven't put the work in. So I've bought a ticket for, I don't know, 850 quid to go and see you stand on the stage and talk about it. Do the work. But you haven't done the work because you thought you could wing it because you're a dude and you're in advertising. You haven't done the work. So what we get to see is this person going on the stage doing their very first run through, not in front of 200 people, but ever.
Right.
If you go on the stage and you haven't done the practice, you haven't done the research, you haven't put it together in a way that makes sense, you haven't thought about the audience, you haven't thought about what it is they should be taking away from it, it's hardly surprising that you feel like an imposter, because you are one. You should get off the stage. You have no place belonging there. You are an imposter. So that's the hard truth. This is why I have a reputation of being quite strict, because you're wasting the audience's time. How dare you get off the stage and give that space, give that 30 minutes to somebody who deserves it, who is probably a woman, because they do the work.
Right. Yeah.
We can get to that in a minute, but so that's the thing that I see a lot with the imposter syndrome. So if you do the work, if you put in all of those layers, you don't have to come to me. You can do it with a friend. You could do it at work. You could do it in front of a mirror. You can record yourself and watch it back, which lots of people hate doing. And the reason they hate doing it is because they get to see what everybody else sees. So they
Yeah.
need to keep on recording it until they like what they see. That's the trick there. So getting yourself perfectly positioned and with audience obsession, with putting in the work, telling simple stories is the way to get rid of large chunks of your imposter syndrome. Once you've done that, all that's left are insecurities and issues that you should be talking to a therapist about and not a speaker trainer.
Yeah. Yeah, nice. But I wanted to ask, actually, just building on that, about slides, because and a shout out here actually to Russell Davies's book, Everything I Learned, or Everything I Know I Learned from PowerPoint, which is just a brilliant book, I think, on this. And also Andy Cowles in his episode, he's a designer, and in his episode of Firestarters, he talks a lot about the visual aspects of slides. So what tends to be your advice for how people should show what they are saying on their slides?
Talk to a designer, read Russell's book, reduce to the core element of what it is you're trying to say. Let's unpack the problem a little bit. So I'm old. The two of us are old men. So we've been around for quite a while, Neil. And no, you're older than me, so pull yourself together.
I know. You're not supposed to say that.
Yeah, you're older than me, so pull yourself together. So the two of us can remember a time when handouts were a thing, where we would go and present something, and there was a screen version and the printout version, which was printed out and bound with a plastic spiral.
Yes.
Slowly but surely, those two versions started to merge into one thing because of people trying to be frugal with their time and not being frugal with the audience's time. This expedited and became a massive thing during between the years 2020 and 2023, when lots of presentations were only being seen on screens.
Right.
So we would pack everything onto the screen. Now, that is not audience obsessed, people. If you're asking people to, and it distracts from you as the speaker as well. So if you have so much information on the screen that your audience is squinting and trying to read 6-point Times New Roman text about something, if you've hidden the core message to such a degree that they can't find it, then you've not done the audience a service. You've done a disservice. Do I recommend the 2008 Planosphere version of PowerPoint where you just have a big picture? If that's serving the audience, absolutely. I have a format that I use now for the Speakery Summit, which I call Curated Conversations. And it's a 25-minute conversation that I'm having with somebody, supported with just photographs that they've brought with them. So 5 photographs that they want to talk about. And that's a format that I ruthlessly stole from Monocle's Quality of Life conference, which they use every so often throughout the day, which is a great way of supporting a conversation.
I like that.
So obviously, it doesn't make sense to put sometimes I feel that what we're seeing on the screen are actually the speaker notes of the person presenting.
Yeah.
And that's not a good look, people. It's not a good look.
Yeah. I mean, I was once asked to do a talk where I had no slides at all. And that was interesting because I just was not used to that at all. So the practice point you make was completely, to the fore there, because you really had to know your story, as it were. But you didn't have that prompt, that kind of visual prompt that you get with slides, and that. So I guess that's quite a challenging thing. If you push yourself to just really think about how can you tell the story without those visual prompts and without bullet points on a slide, and know it well enough to do that. That's probably a sign, isn't it, that you know it pretty well.
Well, that's a very good point that you make there. That oftentimes you have the feeling that the slides are there for the benefit of the speaker. So they're there to help the speaker get them through the story, and not for us as the audience trying to find out what it is they're going on about. One of the practices that I have is to go through a deck with somebody and ask them to tell me what the slide is about. And they have to start each slide with, and this slide is about.
Right.
And it gets them to think about, okay, the true value of the slide for the audience. And if it isn't about the purpose of the presentation, if it isn't about the North Star of the presentation, if it doesn't add value to the audience, then we ruthlessly get rid of it, because it's only there for the speaker's benefit. It's a place for them to put their speaker notes, which is a trap that a lot of people fall into.
Yeah.
The advantage of this, and this is a tip that I have for anybody looking to, so number 4 on my list of Marcus, can you help me with this, is what happens when I black out on stage? So by practicing your presentation and this slide is about modus, that is always your fallback. So you can, if you black out on stage, there are 1,000 people in front of you and it's gone, then you can look down at the speaker screen and literally just say out loud to the audience, and this slide is about.
Yeah, that's a good tip.
And then you're back in, because you've gone through the process of telling either me or yourself or the mirror or your partner or your business colleagues, and this slide is about this. So it's a really good way of just prepping yourself and editing the presentation and making sure it's on point for the audience.
Yeah. I want to ask as well about your just the performance element of it. So how you sort of take command of the stage, even if it's a pitch, I suppose. How you sort of own that story and take command of that position that you're in, and the performance elements. So how do you advise people about those kinds of elements?
I'm going to answer that question with some feedback I received from a customer. They said, Marcus, I have never been so eager to give a presentation in my life. I've never felt so ready. I couldn't wait to get in there and do it. And it wasn't because of any performance tricks. It was because of the level of preparation that they had. If you go and look at any of the performances that I've ever given, yes, I have a certain degree of talent, and yes, my training is slightly different to, I don't know, maybe some of the people listening and watching this podcast. I studied dance. I didn't go and play football as a boy. I studied dance. So I've always been interested in the stage. I've always tried to figure out what a stage means. Understand the relationship between the person on the stage and the audience watching the person on the stage, the difference between stage and screen. But if you watch anything that I've done, in fact, if you watch any really great keynote TED talk, you're watching somebody who has prepared that thing to within an inch of its life. Now,
Yeah.
A lot of people would say, okay, well, let's talk about somebody like Robin Williams, somebody who's well known for improvisation, for example. He just makes it up on the spot. But that, again, is clearly not true, because anybody who is an expert in improvisation knows that there's a huge amount of preparation that goes into that. There's the understanding of what active listening is, that you don't say but, you say and. We're constantly building the interaction between yourself, the audience, and everything that's coming out of your mouth, building on a foundation of work that you've prepped over time. So if you go and watch, for example, Robin Williams, and watch everything that Robin Williams has ever done on stage as improvisation, you start to see patterns building. The fact that he has 12 characters and he mixes and matches them. Right. He puts them in different scenarios, and he sometimes says the same thing, but in different venues. So even there it's preparation, and the posture of the person giving the a presentation change immediately when they are prepared, when they have the feeling, I've got such a great story to tell, such a fantastic insight I want to share with the audience, something that could change their lives, take them down a different route. It changes their posture completely.
Yeah, that sounds. I mean, do you think everyone has an inner performer in there?
My first creative director said to me, Marcus, just because you can hold a pencil doesn't mean you can write.
Right.
He was a copywriter.
Right.
But I could hold a pencil, and I could learn to write, and I could practice writing. I could get better at writing. In fact, I think I'm a better writer now than I am art director, for example. I think because I worked at it. You can improve, you can level up. As a speaker, you are a character in a video game called Speakery, and you gain special tools. You learn speakery spells. You gain experience points. You get to a certain level. You level all the way up to level 55, just like in game Call of Duty or Diablo. And then you can decide if you want to prestige or not, or if you want to stay at that level. And a lot of people I work with come in initially and say, I don't know why I'm here. I can do this.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. And then I say, okay, well, let's nudge the needle. Let's see if we can nudge the needle towards excellence a little bit more. So it's the difference. It's the difference between a 3-hour and 2-second marathon to a 2-hour 59 marathon. One of them is a sub 3-hour marathon. Yes. The other one is still a sub 4-hour marathon. Right. So I'm always looking for needle nudging moments. Now, to come back to your original, the question, do we all have a talent for it? Some people have to work really, really hard at it, like properly hard. They are not show masters. They're not show offs. I like to look at myself. I call myself an introverted show off. So I know what needs to be done, but as soon as it's done, I like to withdraw and hide in a darkened room, because my social battery is so depleted after doing something. I don't want to see or talk to anybody anymore. I find it physically difficult to be in a room with lots of people. I just happen to be kind of good on stage when I do stuff. But for somebody who, and I also happen to believe that introverts are better speakers because they're more empathetic.
Yeah.
And I think that an introverted woman on stage is country miles ahead of the best male speaker that you could think of, because of the levels of empathy and professionalism and eye for detail and focus on the work. So
and is that about the audience bit you were talking about before, and
absolutely,
the practice and everything else?
Yeah, it's the empathy. Empathy is the key skill for a speaker.
And I just want to ask as well, because we have obviously a lot of planners and strategists and so on as the audience for this podcast. So
that's why I've worn a tie, Neil, for the planners. For the planners.
Of course. And it strikes me a lot of what you're saying is, we're talking about a lot of this in the context of conference speaking, but actually a lot of what we're saying is just as relevant for pitching and just or making presentations to an audience, even if there's 20 of a client sat in a boardroom or something like that. Do you think there are any differences, or is it really coming down to the same principles, just applied in perhaps slightly different ways?
The principles are the same. The volume is slightly different. So in a conference room, it's not a conference, but in a conference room, the space is different. The vibe is different. The reason why everybody's there is different. So the volume is slightly different. So if I turned up and did, I don't know, jazz hands in a conference room, that's not necessarily empathetic. There is more focus on getting done. It's also oftentimes a team sport for a strategic planner, right? So they're not going in there on their own, they're going there as part of a team. That's a different dynamic. It's again, that's something that needs to be practiced. So you have those awkward, can you remember those awkward things? So, right, that's all now from me. Over to Neil now to listen to the strategy. Thank you, Marcus. So, those awful kind of like clunky moments. Again, you can, plan that properly. You can practice it. It's a piece of theatre. It's business theatre. But there are certain quiet things, quiet moments that can be dealt with differently. So, one of the most important meetings I've ever had was in a tiny office with 5 people, and there were only 3 chairs, and super cramped, right?
Yeah.
And there was no room for and it was around a laptop and not a big screen.
Wow.
Another one was with a German TV station, and it was just me and the CEO on his sofa with a notepad and a pen. And again, that was super powerful because it was very intimate, and I was drawing out what I thought should be done, and he was giving input, and then I was scribbling it out and changing it and doing it again. People ask, okay, what kit should I be buying? And I think the most valuable, I don't have one in my pocket, it's in my over there in the studio on the stage. The one, just buy yourself a box. Actually, no, just buy yourself a big box. I have a big box here of marker board pens. So I literally have, for you watch this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast, Jan, I literally have boxes and boxes of whiteboard pens, and I always take one with me to a meeting, because if you really want to get audience interaction, just pull out the pen, have your own one. No, it works, because the ones in the conference room never work.
That's so true.
Right. And it always makes you look a little bit more professional when you whip out your own pen. You pop off the top, you put the pen to the whiteboard, and you turn around and you look at them and say, okay, what is it we want to do? And as soon as they start answering, you've got them.
Yeah.
That's when they become complicit in the story, in the process that you're trying to involve them with. So yes, involve a bit of, please buy yourself a clicker, but also have, have whiteboard pens with you so that you can, and if you, okay, Marcus, but how do you know they're going to have a whiteboard there? Take one with you.
Right.
You've got the roll up static things. I always go with roll up static things. Just rip it up, stick it on the window, start writing. So you're in control. So all of these things, so to come back again to the question of what do I do with my hands? It's not about that. It's about being prepared. It's about putting in the work. It's about knowing which room you're going to be in, the context of the room. Are they going to have a whiteboard? Don't know. Take one with you just in case. And this is the fundamentals of getting good at presenting, is getting good at work, is getting good at the work, putting the time in, preparing properly. And then you'll know what to do with your hands.
Right, that makes sense. I'm gonna because we're running short on time, unfortunately. But there's a question which I would love to ask you, if I may, which is who is the best speaker or talk that you have ever seen? And it might be in a pitch rather than a conference, whatever. But what was it that they did, and why was it so powerful?
I have two for you. So there's one that I've seen online, and then there's one that I've seen live. So the one that I've seen online and is my go-to, you have to watch this presentation, is Cindy Gallop, White Men in Advertising. Now, this has not necessarily got to do with presentation technique, although she is very, very good. There are things that I can, there are always things. There's a needle to be nudged. But it's very, very clear what she expects from the audience. The message is so clear. The North Star of White Men in Advertising is it's undeniable. She takes the audience on a journey. And at the end of her, I think it's 25, 30 minutes, you know what you need to do. I'm a big fan of Cindy Gallop on stage. I think her TED is also really good. In fact, it's an X-rated TED. It's an X-rated TED. I think it's the only one that's X-rated. I think there's an actual warning at the beginning of her TED Global talk.
Right.
So Cindy Gallop, and I saw Ryan Holiday in a talk at the Troxy in London last week. He talked about Stoicism, and it was fantastic. It was an hour-long lecture followed by an hour-long Q&A. He was using notes very discreetly. There were no slides. It was just an interesting and interested human sharing insights on a stage, in a theater, answering questions with a very, very clear North Star. So those are the two things, they're the two people that I greatly admire.
Fantastic. Two brilliant examples. And Marcus, we're going to have to draw it to a close, but that has been super useful and just really interesting as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on Firestarters. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please do subscribe, and also don't forget to share. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Marcus. It's been super to have you on Firestarters. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.